Okay. So starting out, reason I'm doing this course, just the goals I have is I want to do a course that'll build a community, do a course and build a community that would help the younger me. I've been in this since 2014, so it's been about 5, 6 years now. And there was really nothing around for in terms of like a roadmap of going from a coding bootcamp to a senior software engineer, and kind of getting to the level that I wanted to be. Um, and the trouble I also had is a lot of my mentors were just kind of like, "Hey, you need to figure it out on your own." Make sure. Okay. So what I want is at the end of 6 weeks, everyone who does the work that I prescribe, I'm going to make it as customized as possible. So this first one is more of an introduction. I'm going to kind of touch on a couple of topics. I'm not really going to go deep into a lot of things. I want to make most of the other classes a little bit more technical, a little bit more focused on things like dynamic programming, which was personally for me one of the hardest things to master in my technical interviews. And talk about things like system design, and SQL and linked lists, everything that goes into doing well at on a technical interview, as well as sort of the behavioral aspects of it, because that also is, more than 50% of it is just getting the behavioral aspect of being able to talk about yourself in a cohesive manner, being able to show your passion for software engineering, especially as a junior engineer. Your passion for your work is going to be something that makes them want to hire you, makes them want to take a risk with you. Because hiring a junior engineer is honestly a risk. It's a risk because, not only is a junior engineer not as productive, obviously, as a more experienced engineer, but if they start, going to senior engineers asking for help all the time, they're also lowering the productivity of everyone on the staff. So that's one of the reasons that the demand for junior engineers has plummeted, along with the fact that since I got in, the coding boot camps have just went crazy, like with the amount of students they were having. So that also led to kind of a massive supply of junior engineers, many of whom were not really prepared to take on the first job. But that being said, if you're a junior engineer, it's not all bad. Once you do have to send in more applications, you do have to put in more work to get your first job, and then work hard at your first job to keep in and keep learning. But once you get to that senior engineer level, it's a lot easier. It's like insanely easy to get interviews for me right now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about active applying, which I'm going to talk to you guys about what you're doing to apply to, but I feel like most of you are not actively applying. I think most of you are probably just sending in your resume, maybe with a short paragraph or something, which is, you have to do a lot more than that as a junior engineer. Okay. So my story, so I was a chemical engineer. I started out in chemical engineering. I got a degree and everything, and I went from there into software engineering. I believe there's one of you, I don't know if you're on the call, but someone else who started out as chemical engineer as well. So first thing I'll tell you is that wherever you started, you should use that as a strength. Whenever a recruiter asks me to tell me about myself, which by the way, you should practice your answer for that, because you'll get that in every single interview, every time, tell me about yourself. And you can use that to kind of come, like come off strong off the gate. And come off like sharp, like a software engineer they want to hire. So what I say for that is, I know it sounds like a complete 180, but it's actually been really helpful starting out as a chemical engineer, because it just gave me the problem solving mindset that I've used throughout my software engineering career. And I just found that it was more fun to solve problem code. And I also have like a story about like why I wanted to switch to software engineering my senior year, how I audited a Java class, and it just kind of rekindled my passion for programming, which I'd actually been doing a little bit of as a kid, programming on graph calculators and everything. So I have like a little story for that. So you should also kind of look at your origin story, and especially as a junior engineer, when you don't have as many jobs to talk about, you can kind of put emphasis on your passion for software and why you got into it. Why you're passionate for it. Okay, so from there, I went to a two-person startup. I was making 40K a year, not great at all. And from there, I went to a two-engineer startup. We had a bunch of other salespeople. Technically, it was we had about 20 people at the startup, but only two engineers. I had better mentorship because the CTO there, the other engineer, had about a decade of experience. But he was a good mentor in terms of teaching me like how a senior engineer thinks, but he didn't actually actively teach me. That's where I first actually had an idea of doing something like this when I actually got to senior engineer level. Because I think most people are not good at mentorship or good at telling you what to do to get there. Um, so anyway, I was making 85K here, so that was a good jump. It was two times what I was making, but still, not what I could be making. And then I joined a proper startup, 7 engineers, a bunch of salespeople and all the other staff, and I was making 135K, and I was fired from that. And the reason was because they were giving me, I didn't really do a lot of, I didn't suss out the culture, the work culture, and what kind of work I'd be doing. I think that's one of the questions that a lot of you had is how do I go from a job which I like to a job where which I like but I'm underpaid to a job where, the culture might be different. The culture might be, toxic, or the work might suck, whatever. And I didn't do enough to suss that out here, and I learned from that. Because I was fired basically because, they were just literally just giving me super tedious stuff, like small bug fixes, refactoring type stuff, just no features at all that I was building, and I was just taking way too long because I just lost my motivation for the job. And that was kind of a turning point for me. I took a week off. I literally just took a week off to really think about, do I want to be a software engineer anymore? I really thought about leaving the field, because when they fired me, they said, basically said that I wasn't a good engineer, that I wasn't performing well. And yeah, it was a turning point where I really looked into why I got in the field in the first place. And I actually got in. I wanted to build things with code. That's what really drew me to the field. And I realized that I wasn't getting to do that at that company. I was just kind of a small cog in the machine, not really doing anything interesting at all. So from that point, I was like, okay, I'll be more selective about the companies I interview at. And I made a list of the things I wanted in terms of work culture, the people I work with, the work I do. I wanted it to be challenging, wanted it to be something that helped me grow as a software engineer. And I still wanted to work at a semi-startup type environment. And that actually helped because after that, within 2 weeks, I had a new job. I actually had 2 offers, both at 150K. This was 3 engineers again. I had much better mentorship. That's something I kind of sussed out at that job is what kind of mentorship I'd have, how much time they'd spend kind of looking at my code. That's a big part of mentorship for those of you junior or mid or even senior is to grow, you must have good code review. People must review your code and give you good feedback. If that's not part of your job and they just oh, whatever, just merge it in and you're responsible for anything failing, you're not going to grow as well as if you have code review. I also got a junior engineer to mentor there, which was something I was also looking at, something I wanted because that also helps you grow, by the way, is teaching other people as I'm doing now. I also had an amazing team, amazing product. Those are the other things I was looking at. I got all of that at this job. And then, the problem with early stage startups, they ran out of money. So I was out looking again, but this time I kind of figured the other offer I'd gotten was, I liked it, only the product wasn't something I connected as much, but the team, everything else was really, really, really good. And I got them to give me a little bit more money. It was actually 153 base and then a lot more stock than initially we were offering. So about 175 total comp and also fully remote. That's something I negotiated for because I basically, I'm not going to get too much in negotiation in this class, but it really just comes down to leverage. And there's a lot of, talk about what you need to say, what you need to do, but it really just comes down to if you genuinely have a better option, if they genuinely need you, want you more than you want them, then you have the leverage. That's all it really boils down to. And people try to fake that. It's very hard to fake unless you've had many years negotiating. It's very hard to actually fake that. So like the negotiation 101 for software is just have other offers, have other options, which fortunately is somewhat easy with the supply and demand being what it is. Okay, so let's see. And this, I'm going to talk about kind of my learning methodologies. And this is going to be, I'm just going to touch on this. I was planning to go over, like, show an example of this with dynamic programming, but it would take too long. I think that's an entire class by itself. I'm just going to touch on the methods I use. So yeah, it won't make as much sense right now, but I'll illustrate this with the other classes. So the first one is test thyself. So what that means is a lot of times when you're studying, like when most people study, they just kind of read and do problems without really absorbing the material as well as they would if they were doing it as if they were being tested. And that's something that if you look at studies on learning, you'll find that is the biggest thing that every study finds is if a student tests, himself or herself with the timer as if they're actually going through the question on an actual test, and even if they don't get it, then they look at the solution, they'll do far better. That sticks in your brain far, far better than if you like just kind of were more lackadaisical about it and just kind of acted like it was just practice and whatever, and you had no time limits. So basically, yeah, test yourself, act as if you have a time limit. And even if you run a car problem, you have no idea, just act as if it's an interview. What would you do if you had no idea what the problem? And then when you look at the solution, actually, I'm going to talk about this. So basically, write out the solution and make sure you understand every line of that solution and just kind of drill down into that one problem, into that one solution, and that'll help you understand the variations of that problem. So no tension is, I think that's one of the reasons that people don't learn as efficiently, or they don't challenge themselves. They'll do easier problems than they should. You should have a degree of discomfort. So when I say no tension, just kind of, I know it sounds kind of zen, but just kind of be okay with the discomfort and with the tension you might feel. Don't let it affect you. Instead of looking at how many problems you solve and how quick you are, look at like just time boxing yourself. What I do is just do a 10-minute, I spend 10 minutes on a problem. If I don't get anywhere, then I'll look at a solution and I'll just write out the solution. And a lot of times I'll write out solutions by different people, so I really get an understanding of how they solved it. And extensions, I mean that if in 10 minutes I'm making some progress, I'll give myself another 10-minute extension. Just see, like, it's kind of an art to see when you should look at the solution. But if you're spending hours on a problem, you're definitely doing it wrong. You're wasting time. You should, at that point, look at the solution and really try to suss out what's going on with the solution and how you can apply it to other problems. I was saying test thyself again because that's, again, a big part of it. So slight variations. So there was an interesting study done where they had two groups of people, and basically the task was they wanted to get them to throw a ball in a bucket 10 feet away and see, who was best at it. Like, could you teach that, and how would they get good at it? So for one group, they had them, every other day come in and just throw a ball into a basket 10 feet away, for half an hour, whatever. And the next group, they had them come in and they'd have the basket, 11 feet away or 12 feet away or 8 feet away. Slight variations of that. And after a few weeks, they tested both groups, and it turns out the group that had the slight variations actually did better getting the ball into the basket 10 feet away than the group that was just practicing getting the ball in the basket 10 feet away for a few weeks. So what does that really come down to with this, with problem solving, is that you should practice problems. Like, let's say the house problem problem, you can look that up in dynamic programming. That's kind of a very commonly asked one. And from there, you can go to something that's similar, like, and you can Google search all these. They're pretty like common problems called paint fences, which has a slight variation in there that will throw you off a little bit, but it will help you understand that pattern of dynamic programming that Hofstadter um, it's hard to like explain this part of it. It's easier. I'll talk about this more in the actual dynamic programming class. I'll show you what it means, but essentially do similar problems to really understand that scope, that pattern that you're looking at with those problems. And then let's see. So Eric Clapton is a musician who he's considered one of the greatest guitar players of all time. And he didn't actually have a proper teacher. He learned through recordings. And he learned through recordings of, another famous guitar player from, way back. And the way he I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah. So the way that he learned is by playing those recordings over and over and just listening to them and playing out each note and understanding each note, and then moving on to like adding in the next note and playing them all together. It's a technique called chunking, actually, another study technique you can look up. But basically, again, that kind of goes back, let's say dynamic programming, the first thing to learn is one of the hardest parts is how to recognize if it's a dynamic programming question. And the second part is, looking at the recurrence to relationships, looking at the space-time complexity, which actually is pretty easy. Like all the brute force space-time complexity for dynamic programming questions are always, x to the n of some variation of that, which we'll talk about that too. And again, I know this, like some of this may not make sense. I'm just kind of giving you a high level overview, and I'm going to show it to you with examples. This will make a lot more sense. And yes, I already kind of covered it, but do harder problems, like go outside of your comfort zone and understand every part of the solution. Like really write out the code for the solution. Actually, when I'm saying, translate out multiple solutions, usually what I do is I look at a solution in like Java, and I usually write my code in Ruby or JavaScript. So I'll write out a solution in JavaScript. So that'll really help me kind of understand and visualize what's actually going on. And then spaced repetition, I think most of you probably run across that with something like Anki, which does that really well, which is basically learn something, then come back to it later and later intervals to have it really stick in your brain. And there's some good pre-made decks for system design that I use. It's if you search for system design primer on Google, you run across a GitHub repo, and they have a pretty good Anki deck that you should download. You can just kind of go through it just to keep your system design like information up to date. Okay, so filling out your next job. So this is one that people are talking about, like, how do you know that the next job is going to be good? It's going to have a good work culture. So basically, I mean, you just have to ask the right questions, and you should have multiple offers too. Just so you're not always going to find that give the right answers to your question. So one question to ask, and by the way, this question is really, really good. You guys should write this down. This is a good question that interviewers love being asked. How do you measure success for this role? Because not only are you asking, a question that'll help you understand what they're expecting out of you, but you're showing that you want to be successful at this role. Another way to ask that is, what does an ideal engineer look like for this role? Like, are they, what's the character and the technical skills of the ideal engineer for the role? Interviewers love asking this question, especially recruiters. And then in one-on-ones, what do you wish you could change about this job? Now, I say one-on-ones, I've also asked some panels too. This is still a good question. But another way you could ask it is, what do you not like about this job? Something like that. But I like asking more in one-on-ones because in panels, usually I'll find they're a little bit more vague. They're not as descriptive because, you just have other people there who may or may not affect the career, so they're not as real about their answers. Work-life balance questions. You can straight up ask these questions. Like, what is work-life balance like at this company? You can straight up ask. But I found that you get more honest answers, because usually when you ask what's work-life balance, they aren't as descriptive. They'll say like, oh, it's good, everyone comes and does their work and leaves, or something like that. But and they usually say, yeah, like in crunch time, yeah, we usually say later, but that doesn't usually happen. And then you can kind of dig deeper into that and say, okay, what's a recent crunch time thing that happened? What happened in that? So you can go there, or you can just start with like, what's the process like when there's a major bug? How do you ensure it doesn't happen again? You can even ask if there's any recent failures that happened in the organization, or what is the recent failure that happened in the organization, because there always will be one. And then what they did to handle that. Because that also tell you, because usually like work culture, the worst work cultures I've found are like ones where they don't have a good process for handling when there's crunch time. Those ask for them to keep coming in, and deadlines keep getting pushed back. And you can also ask what happens if with deadlines, if scope of a project increases. You can kind of dig deep into this. They expect you to do that. So yeah, they expect you to sorry. Yeah, they expect you to ask questions. They like it when you ask these questions about specific question about the job, because that means that you're serious about it. I would say that some don't be say this, like do try to come across someone who cares more about the value you can provide rather than the value they can provide. Come across someone who will like put forth the effort if needed during crunch time. But you want to make sure you know your worth. You want to make sure that they have a good process in place for crunch times. For making sure it's not like every week that something big fails and everyone has to work 24-hour shift to fix it. Like, you don't want that to be a terrible work culture. um, okay. All right. So another big one is, if you're unsure you're gonna enjoy it after interviews, you won't. Or it's kind of hard to read. If you're unsure after an interview, then you're probably not gonna enjoy it. Like, companies and people are nicest during the interview process. So if you feel like they're not nice, if you're not enjoying the company after the interview, then it's only gonna get worse. They have the most time for you. They tell you the most things during the interview. And by the way, this is actually why I think it's actually kind of fun to interview, because I learn a lot. I can ask any question about the architecture, what else is going in their company, what the failures they're dealing with. I can be super like specific. And they'll tell me, and that's something, even if I go to like meetups and things, like, people aren't that forthright about what's going on in their company, what bugs they're dealing with, what's like a recent project. That's another good question, by the way. What's a recent project they've worked at, and just kind of like get to know the company, get to know what you'll be working at on. Another question to ask is, what's like the roadmap for engineering look like right now, and see like what they have on the plate. Because one thing I've found that's been a big one for me is, like, when I started that job that I was fired at, I didn't ask that question. It turns out their roadmap was like, they didn't have much of one, and they just gave me tedious stuff to work on. And then knowing your worth. So it's like a quick story, but I remember it was, I think, 2 years ago, so like mid-level at that point, and I started interviewing. One of the companies I got through the onsite, and the recruiter said, okay, and it's this typical kind of, we emailed back and forth to set up a time when I could fly there and everything, and then they're like, okay, let me know when you book the flights. I said, oh, are you not booking the flights for me? Should I expense it afterwards? How does this work? And you should always ask this. That's like, especially for the recruiters and HR people, they're the ones who would know about expensive stuff. You don't want to be stuck with a bill afterwards. And then the recruiter said, oh, this company doesn't actually pay for engineers to come out and interview with them. This is astounding. Even as a junior engineer, companies paid for me to come out and interview with them. Like, the fact that a company won't pay for you to come out. By the way, this is a major red flag. Drop the company if they do this. If they won't pay for you to come out and interview with them, and again, the nicest that a company will be is during the interview process. So if they don't think well enough for the engineers to pay for them to come out and interview with them, you're already taking time off work to come out and interview with them, and they won't pay for your hotel and flight, that is not a company you want to work for. You know, and I even told the recruiter for that, like, that's a major red flag. And he said, oh, but they just got $11 million in funding. You know, this is a great opportunity. It's a great company. Like, don't fall for that bullshit. Know your worth. You shouldn't be paying for yeah, any flights or hotels. That's absolutely ridiculous. Um, but yeah, like interviews can be fun. Just once you're better at them, um, it's a good learning opportunity. And you know, it's nice to like learn get new offers that even if you like your current company, you can use to get a better raise. Um, so and that goes to my next one. Is basically what I've said. Like always be interview ready. Um, you know, it's fun once you get at a good at it. So what does it mean to be interview ready? You're first of all the resume, and I know some of you on this call, some of you on this call are more experienced and probably don't have that much trouble getting interviews. Um, but you can still benefit from this. I think once I really improved my resume, I really even for blind resume submissions, I was hitting almost 80%. You know, getting the interview from those. So that can truly help because that really increases the amount of practice that you get with interviewing and practice even at like tier 3 companies, like companies you don't care about, helps you with the companies you do care about. That helps you get that interview mindset because you know normally I'm not someone who's extremely outgoing or anything, but after I've done a number of interviews, I get in that mindset. I get more quick-witted, almost like just coming up with like one thing is coming up with examples of things I've worked at my last company. Like they ask, oh, what's conflict you face, blah blah blah. Like typical questions they'll ask, and then I can always come up. You know, I'm much quicker at like talking about that. You know, after I had a lot more interview practice. Like in fact, like if I have a company that I'm excited about, that I'm nervous about, then I always try to schedule in like a company I'm not excited about earlier in the day, um, to kind of get me in that interview mode. So let's see. So for a resume, the first thing I would say is you need to do the 10-second test. Um, the amount of time that a recruiter looks at a typical resume, most people are like kind of astonished to find out, but it's literally 10 seconds. That's how long a recruiter will look at a typical resume. And if it's a startup, you know, and you're looking at it, it can be even less. They'll just look at it for 10 seconds, see if there's something that pops out, if there's someone if they want to like read more. So the 10-second test is if you go over your resume, give yourself 10 seconds, even less actually, and see if things pop out. Do you want to interview? Would you want to interview yourself after that 10-second test? Like, is that someone that stands out to you for the position? So what does it come down to make your resume pass the 10-second test? The first one is quantification. I've talked to a lot of you individually about this, but basically it's quantifying what the situation was like before, what the system was like before, and what it was like after. So like, you know, if you sped up some task, you automated something that would take like hours to do before, and so it basically saved the company X amount of hours, or you save the money. You know, if you look at like, if you saved, let's say QA engineer spends, you know, 10 hours a week, or an operations team member spends, you know, 20 hours a week, or the operations team is spent on some task that you automated. Then you can look at like what a typical operations team member might make. You can estimate that, and you can say, okay, I saved, you know, $22,000 a year, or you can just say I saved 20 hours per week of operations team time, whatever. That's one way to look at it. You can also talk about like, you can also quantify things like a data set size that you might have worked with, something machine learning, like a new something you sped up, or you can even quantify like, hey, I collaborated with 3 teams, you know, and I led X amount of teams to finish a big project that I rolled out across the entire company, and it's become number one selling point for the sales team. You know, it doesn't have to be entirely accurate. Like you should do your best, put forth your best effort to make it accurate, but it doesn't have to be like exact. You don't expect You don't expect these numbers to be exact. Another way to like talk about things is to talk about taught yourself. I'm going to talk about this with actually a volunteer that's allowed me to kind of improve the resume in real time. Basically, you don't want to talk about how you're a quick learner. You don't want to say that. You want to demonstrate it. And how do you demonstrate that? By saying something like, I taught myself, Elixir and GraphQL in 2 months to do XYZ project, which did XYZ for the company. So taught myself is a good way of saying I'm a quick learner. But you show it, you don't say it. And then mentored also, that's something that junior engineers can't say, but mid-level engineers might be able to see a little bit of that. That's something that also stands out, especially if you want to get to senior engineer level. You want to see people, senior engineers, can mentor junior engineers. That's something that you should look for opportunities to mentor, people who are lower than you at your company, whenever possible too. Because again, that helps you learn as well. Okay, so one page. This is something that a lot of people don't agree with. I would say that it's not set in stone for it to be one page, but do the 10-second test. Is it actually worth going to the second page? And usually, I would say 99% of the time, it's not. If you're debating whether it should be one page or not, it probably needs to be one page. Again, it comes back to the 10-second test. You have a second page. Are they really going to get to that second page? So you can target resumes keywords. This is less important to get more experience, really, because it's easier to like get an interview. But you could target resume like if a particular job is asking for skills with Kafka and stuff, you can change the skills for that. You can change some of your resume bullet points. I've done that in the past where I had different bullet points of different jobs and just kept changing it around. I really don't do that as much anymore. I just don't spend the time. Like I tend to get interviews anyway, but I think for a more junior level, that can be extremely helpful, especially if your resume is going over one page. You can kind of take out bullet points that don't apply to the exact job at hand and change it as needed. And then no typos. This one should be obvious. Typos obviously just make you look stupid. Like it makes you look careless. Have someone else look at it if you want. There should be 0 typos on your resume. Okay, and the cover letters. This is something that's I hate when people say this, like when they say, oh, do a cover letter, it's not going to hurt. Yes, it won't hurt, but it is a time sink. Your time is very valuable when you're searching, your job searching. So I literally, cover letters don't do anything. You'll find this for most companies, cover letters do absolutely fuck all. You can put in like a paragraph or something. I sometimes when I upon AngelList, I have this like 1 paragraph thing, I interested in your company, I just want to see like, I see something like I'd like to talk about how I can provide value, or I say like help contribute to XYZ your company's growth as a software engineer. Say something like quick 2 or 3 sentences. I don't even bother changing it for the most part, but cover letters really don't do that much. It's massive waste of time. I used to do it all the time, and then I stopped doing it and realized it wasn't helping me at all. There's a caveat like certain startups that have something that makes them extremely popular, like Basecamp, because if you don't know, the guys who made Basecamp are write a lot about software engineering, write a lot about how they have a very good work culture and stuff. So they have a lot of people who apply, and plus they're the guys who created Ruby on Rails. It's a popular language. And then Buffer also, they write a lot about their remote work culture and everything. So they have a lot of applicants, and cover letters for them can be useful because honestly, they have so many applicants, and their bar is not so much based on experience and stuff or technical ability. It's more based on work culture and whether you fit in or not. So they have to really narrow it down based on cover letters. Whereas for most companies, it really just comes down to, hey, this is guys who have like technical skills, experience. Cool. Like let's at least have a phone call, figure it out. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of turn this over to you guys now. What is, for those of you who are trouble getting interviews, if that's your bottleneck, what is your application process? I think you guys can. Yeah, you guys should be able to talk.
When I was actively applying, I was mostly like, excuse me, blasting out resumes. And for me, like my background is I don't have a like I transitioned from like data analysis to PM, and just recently, like with only a couple months of experience, started doing dev work. So I think like I usually just I definitely try to make it pretty focused, but in general, like my biggest bottleneck is just that, yeah, not converting a lot of those active, like kind of just dump a resume into phone screens.
Okay. So most of your applications are through the like the application website on the company, and you're not getting much response for that. You hear me?
Yeah, either I'd apply directly or I'd like connect with the recruiter on like LinkedIn, just real quick, and kind of like you know say, hey, I'm interested in this link, and here's my resume.
Okay, cool. So that's better than I was thinking. So when you typically message these recruiters, what kind of response do you get from them?
Most of the time, it's sort of like a neg, like oh, you know, like thanks for connecting, like we'll like take this back to the team.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's all right. I'm gonna ask. You guys can just type it in the chat. Like, if are you guys doing, something similar to patch here, or do
Mhm.
you guys do something else? Let me find the
You
chat
mean
here.
just you mean just for like applying in general?
Yeah, applying in general. If that's your bottleneck in terms of you're not getting a lot of interviews from your applications.
Yeah, I feel like for me the biggest bottleneck is like a lack of deep experience and knowledge. I've been like spamming, like not like spamming, but setting out like 30 to 50 a day, just trying to get any sort of response. A ton of rejections. Gotten some interviews though, and then they've sort of progressed to the coding challenges. So like I guess getting some, but for me right now the biggest bottleneck is just I guess getting the coding trans or the coding challenge to translate to final interview.
Okay. Okay, cool. So what I want to say about this, so Patch is actually doing it somewhat right, like in terms of you're actually doing at least reaching out to recruiters, but your message needs to be a little bit um, more personal, more just kind of um, asking for information rather than just asking them to put you in the queue
Hmm.
of like interview candidates. Um, so I actually have some templates which I wasn't able to dig up for this interview. I'll have it for the next or this class. I'll have it for the next one. But essentially, you just kind of want to, you even want to reach out to engineers. I don't know how many of you are in the Bay Area, but if you are, you have an advantage. Or if you're in like a bigger tech hub, you have an advantage. They can reach out to engineers and just kind of like ask them about their job, ask them for like a coffee meeting. Like I'm not getting anything from doing this. The thing I'm getting is that hopefully like you guys can improve, and I'll feel good about that. I mean, honestly, that's what I'm getting. Like, if you guys improve, if you guys like get the job of your dreams, like I'll feel good. And you should not discount that process for high level engineers. Um, because in a sense, we all kind of want to give back. We all kind of want to feel good. And if you can kind of almost flatter a more senior engineer at a company and say, hey, I'd love to know about your career path. I'd love to just talk with you. That would give you a better hit rate. And I did this very, very early on in Atlanta. Just had coffee meetings and just didn't even bring up. Um, hold on, oh, okay. Got the chat open. Yeah, okay. So Conquistador Confuso in the chat, he's got the right idea there too. Um, so you basically message them on LinkedIn, and you do want to kind of ask them more about the position. I'm gonna dig up the templates and I'm gonna post that. Like you basically for recruiters, you want to talk about, just ask them like talk about the job and see what kind of value you can bring to the software engineer. Yeah, I'll look at some templates and I'll share that too. But that is a big part of when you're a junior engineer. You have to like bring more to the table than just throwing your resume in there, because you're not gonna stand out above the people who have more experience. Especially nowadays, where unfortunately, I think that the amount of junior engineer jobs have just kind of dwindled, and senior engineer jobs have kind of skyrocketed. Kind of what I've seen over the last few years. Okay, moving on. Yeah, can someone just remind me in Discord to do that? Just look that up. So next one, getting over fear of failure. This was a big one that was also brought up. So for this fear of failure for interviews, one thing I found for this, I think the reason that this happens is because you apply to companies that you're interviewing at companies you're super like into, you really want to get into. And this one, yeah, honestly, this kind of tip kind of applies a little bit less to junior engineers or the ones who are having trouble actually even getting interviews, because then you're, hold on. Sure, okay. So where was I? Yeah, tier the companies. You want to you want to kind of interview with companies you really don't care about. Even the junior engineers, you can do this. Like, I would, correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to pipe in here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like most of you are applying to companies, in locations, at least in locations that you'd like to work in, like either your city or a city you're willing to move to. Is that true for most people?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would recommend that you actually, and this is slightly unethical, I know. I actually had a little bit of guilt for doing this, but it is very helpful, especially if you're, chat again. Yeah, especially if you're struggling with getting interviews, just getting those tier 3 interviews that you really don't care about, that'll really, really, especially if you get an offer from it. Because if you get an offer, not only does that increase your confidence, in a way that you really can't fake. And then but it also gives you leverage, because when you go to a company, you can now say, hey, actually I have an offer. So, but I really want to interview with you guys. Like, I think, I really am passionate about what we're doing, whatever. Then they'll, not only will they speed up their timeline, but actually it increases your chance of getting the interview. They honestly I get more offers after I already got an offer. I think it just gives a signal to the company that if someone's, willing to hire you, that means you must be somewhat good. It's like a weird psychological thing. It also gives you leverage, like you can use that offer as leverage to say, for money, for perks, whatever. And of course, again, the practice. There's nothing quite like an actual interview for practice. Now, going from there, the next best thing are mock interviews. So for that, I recommend interviewing.io. A lot of you may have heard of Pramp. I hate Pramp. It's literally the blind leading the blind there. Now, Pramp, for those you don't know, is a interview platform that anyone can go in. You can be the interviewer and it can be the interview, and they just match people up. It's a good concept, but the people who are interviewing you, like, they may not have any idea what they're talking about. And I had a problem with that. Like, I had people tell me I wasn't doing things right, especially for problems. They'll give you the solution to it, but maybe there's a different way to solve it. And then I have to figure that out later because, they say, oh, you solved it wrong. Where I'd be like, really? And it's better if you have an interviewer who's actually, understands the problem a little bit better and can teach you a little bit better, like sometimes I get like completely different feedback. Like one person would say you're talking too much, the other person would say you're not talking enough. But none of them have any interview experience. They don't know what they're talking about. And yeah, actually, the behavioral aspect was useful in terms of just like it does kind of replicate the interview setting of talking to a stranger and just kind of being able to talk really, and just in that aspect, yeah, it is not terrible for that. But I would say interviewing.io, if those of you haven't checked it out, it's really, really good. It's not perfect. They do have a better, they have more of a gate in terms of who they let in. They say they only let in like senior engineers to interview and stuff. I don't know how accurate that is. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but I've had a lot better experience there. In fact, I'm actually probably going to start interviewing again once I hit 1 year at my current job. Well, I'll start interviewing again if they don't give me enough of a raise. Like, that's when I'll start interviewing and then, get some offers and use that as leverage, which I'm actually looking forward to actually enjoy it. So yeah, for mock interviews also, I'm going to do like some 30-minute interviews on Calendly with you guys. I don't have as much time for this right now. Because even like putting together these presentations took a lot longer than expected and everything. But I do want to, in terms of my support, I do want to do more of like, email you guys with active problems that you guys should work on, what you guys should work on next, because you're all in sort of a different spot in your career and you have different bottlenecks. A lot of you have the problem of getting into interviews where you just need to get better resumes, get better at like doing the active applications of just reaching out to recruiters and engineers yourself and just building up your network. Others of you are just having trouble with getting past the interview stage, whether it's phone interview, technical screen, whatever. So each of you has a different bottleneck that you need to work on. And then you guys have each other. So I made this Discord thing because hopefully it'll be a community of people like giving each other positive feedback, or like good constructive feedback, and kind of giving like, I'm going to talk about this later, but motivation is one of the biggest problems that you'll run into, especially if you're having trouble even getting the interview. Okay, so as I was saying, interviews are kind of fun. Because you also learn a lot. I don't know if I already mentioned this, but people really are very forthright in interviews about like their architecture, about everything else. I've learned a shit ton just interviewing, not only like what they say, but how they say it, how they talk about their architectural decisions, their trade-offs, which is also why you should, do actual interviews, because when you talk to CTOs, these 2 or 3 companies, you get an idea of how you should be talking about your own projects, how you should display your own expertise. And then also it's way less stress at your job. For those of you who get stressed at jobs and stuff, it's like, once you know that, okay, worst case, like your manager leaves and, your teammates leave, and then all of a sudden you have a completely different work culture than what you signed up for, well, start interviewing. That's it. And then it's less stressful knowing that, hey, like, oh, worst case, I'll just get, a same or better work culture with the same, usually better, more money. Okay, next. So senior engineers versus junior engineers. So for this, the biggest thing that will differentiate them that I've found is tenacity and confidence. One thing I found early on when I was at my first job, I realized that, or not my first job, the second one, where I had, the CTO had about over a decade of experience. There was some problem, I remember, something about a proxy that we were setting up wasn't that important, and it was all like after hours. But I just like kind of asked that question, and again, it wasn't like a big business concern. We could work around it. We didn't really need that proxy. But after like 10 minutes, he wasn't really like getting anywhere. And I was like, you know what, forget it. Like I'll just work around it. And I just remember he's like, nope, and he just kept going. He just kept going, and just trying different things. Googling what was needed. He just had that tenacity, and he figured it out. In half an hour, he figured it out and figured out what to do. And part of that is knowing that that kind of problem, that proxy problem, he knew like kind of internally that that's something that could be figured out. And part of that is the tenacity of just like, tenacity and confidence of knowing you can solve a problem and sticking to it until you do. I think I wrote that twice just to make that clear. There's also another story. This job that I have right now, the offer when I first got it, I remember there's a problem that I just could not figure out, but I just kind of kept discussing with the interviewer. It was interleaving strings. You can look that up. It's one of the hard problems in LeetCode. I couldn't quite figure it out, but I kept discussing with the interviewer, kept like kind of going over it. He was giving me his stuff. We ran out of time, and and he's like, you know what, we ran out of time, and so I just remember like I wasn't even trying to do this, but I remember just saying, yeah, like just kept going, and I just kept asking questions. Until finally the other interviewers came in and say, hey, you guys are like 15 minutes over your time. I never got like the full answer to that question, but I remember that that whole interview stage really well, because I thought like, wow, I really bombed that question. I'm not gonna get an offer. I never get an offer before I left the building. So first of all, just because you screw up one problem doesn't mean you don't get an offer. But also because like I know I also did somewhat bad in the system design question in the interview, so I probably shouldn't have got that offer. But I think it was because of that tenacity, and that's something even as an interviewer now. I've interviewed a couple of engineers too. That's something that really stands out. It's someone who's like, because you'll always run into problems you don't know. So having that tenacity of just sticking to it and figuring it out, that's pretty big. Rubber ducking. So for those who don't know, rubber ducking is basically like kind of running out of time, so I'll try to make this as quick as possible. So it basically means asking, instead of asking like an engineer around you, ask like, put a rubber duck on your desk. There's a story behind this, but put a rubber duck on your desk and just ask the rubber duck what your question is, and that actually helps. Like I don't actually do that, but I do. Before, if there's something I really don't know, then I'll actually type it out. I'll do a Slack message for it. Instead of like asking the question kind of over speech, I'll write out the question. I'll ask in Slack, and then a lot of times I'll just delete that question because I'll realize, wait, I know what he's going to ask me if I did this. I'll go do that. A lot of times that'll kind of like fix it, because sometimes when you're reads actual working problem, you won't see some of the obvious things you should do without you ask someone else. And that also another, like I said before, the reason companies are kind of reluctant with junior engineers is because they can take up time from other senior engineers. So if you're someone who can be independent, that is a big part of getting past that junior level. Yeah, I already talked about this. So a pro for junior engineers. So one thing is like passion, right? Like if you're passionate about how you're going to software engineering, about being a software engineer, about tech, that's something that just stands out. So always be passionate in interviews. Even if you're faking that, like just be passionate and just practice being passionate and going, especially about like what drew you to software engineering. So for junior engineers here, so like you do need to work on your side projects and need to do like what I was saying, active applying, customizing messages to get interviews. And then, because that is pretty much your bottleneck. And for senior engineers / mid-level, you need to usually practice interviewing and getting past those technical screens, getting past, a lot of times it's more behavioral than you think. Like a lot of times you might think you're good, but actually you're coming off as arrogant, whatever. And that can be a big part why you're not getting the offer. So yeah, junior mid-level engineers. So your biggest concern, your biggest concern should be mentorship. If you're not at a job where you have at least some high-level engineer that you can kind of learn from, your growth is somewhat limited. And that's what I had in my first job, where it was like a 2-person startup, like a 2-engineer startup. And the founder was really cutting costs by hiring like basically right out of bootcamp engineers. And I put in a lot. I literally put in like at least 60 hours a week at that job every week. because there's so much shit I just couldn't figure out. I just bang my head against the wall and figure it out. But there's so much stuff that just kind of went wrong. Like a lot of things just ended up failing, and we ended up losing clients and stuff because of that. I didn't know how to fix it properly. And I mean, going back now, I know that I made some like bad architectural decisions, setting up the database and everything, and not being able to scale properly. But if I had like a senior engineer who, not even like they have to sit down with me and mentor me, it would be good. But even if they don't, we can learn just from how they're doing their code. And again, code reviews, like you really want to join a company which has a code review process. So your code gets reviewed, and you review your senior engineer's code as well before it gets merged in. Like my current company, we need at least 2 code reviews before it can get merged in to people who aren't the programmer. And you want to be a sponge. That should be pretty self-explanatory. There's always someone or something to learn from. Even now, like I'll learn just we had like tech talks at our company today, and there was a new VP of engineering, and I learned by how he was describing his projects and how he was describing himself and his whole career trajectory. He was able to like kind of like his intro was good. It's better than what I used. It was less than 3 minutes. Gave like a good overview of his progression, demonstrated his skills without coming across as arrogant. I'm gonna incorporate parts of that into my own answers for interviews. And then toy projects. There's something that I've actually had instances where I was able to get skip a take-home coding project because I said, hey, can you check out my project on my GitHub? And maybe that will show you that I'm doing like the testing and development and everything you want to see from the coding test you're going to give me. You having like one really good project is better than having 10 mediocre projects. Having 10 really good projects is even better, but time-wise, you should work on making like a really good project, TDD and everything, something that someone looks at, is well documented too, so they can easily go through it, look at like what you're doing, what your architectural decisions are, put that in README to your architectural decision, what you used, why you used it. And then just real quick, you should be careful what kind of take-home test you accept. Back when I was more junior, I would accept every take-home test. And yeah, like if you don't have any other options, then yeah, do it. But it can be really motivationally draining if you do the wrong ones. Like I had ones where I built an API for their like custom. I built a client for their custom API, and there's literally like nothing to do with it. I can't put that on my GitHub. Like nobody knows what that is. So I would recommend, if it's possible, to go for take-home coding projects, which you can then like put on your GitHub. Like if they're telling you to build like checkers, that's a good take-home project because you can put that on your GitHub, you can make it better, and you can use that as a selling point for yourself. All right,
Yo,
real quick. So,
hey, I had a really good question.
Sure.
I guess you just talked about checkers in the previous example and how that's a good experience or how that's a good sample project.
Yeah.
So as like a mid-level developer or as like a junior mid-level developer, should you be focusing on like those kind of projects, or should you be focusing on like leak code, or like in your experience, what do you get more of for like mid-level interviews or like junior mid-level interviews?
I mean, it depends, right? For junior level interviews, you won't. For extremely junior level interviews, yeah, I'll be honest with this one. I don't know as much because I interviewed with startups for junior level interviews. I couldn't even get interviews with the bigger tech companies at that time. So, and startups won't ask you as many lead code questions. They'll give you more take-home coding tests, things like that. I think for any of the big tech companies, even for juniors, they'll ask more lead code type questions. But I will say that if you're trying to get interviews, then lead code is you should definitely do that. You should definitely work at it, and do. One thing you guys should search for this. It's called the Blind, BLIND, 75 tech questions. Just search for that. It should come up there's a guy who posted 75 lead code questions that kind of you know, encompass all the fundamentals you need to know. Look that up. Those are, you know, try to be efficient with lead code time. You know, do those questions, try to really understand them, try to see the patterns behind them. But I would say if you don't have it, you should definitely get projects under GitHub. And you should spend more time doing like active applications, reaching out to recruiters, setting up info meetings, things like that, sort of the networking aspect of it, so you can just at least get the interview. Now, once you get to the level, like it used to be over a year, but now it might be over 2 years, then it's easier to actually get, and it's easier to get interviews. Then you should concentrate on the next bottleneck, which likely will be those lead code type questions. I mean, the way I look at it is like, what is your bottleneck? What's your biggest bottleneck? Put most of your time towards that. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. Yeah, thanks.
Yep. So, what was I? Yeah, so receiving a must read as a senior software engineer. So this is just real quick. Comes down to, this is true for actually anyone really. It comes down to how much focus time you can put in. Like most software engineers, like when you really talk about it, there are days when you're like absolutely just useless. Like you don't get shit done. And then there's days you're just on fire. So it really just comes down to how much focus time you can put in like every week. And I mean, there are jobs. I had one job, actually most of my jobs, except this one, my last one, where they wanted like a 9 to 5, as long as you're there 9 to 5 and you're working all that whole time, they're okay with it. This one, and my last one, is just flexible hours, get shit done. And that's the type of company you really should go for. That's the work culture that I like appreciate. And I make sure that I put focus time in my bad days. I just kind of like cover overly, but time boxing saves lives. So I use Pomodoros, which are like 25 minutes on and then 5 minutes break. And then within that time, even if I'm feeling super just burnt out, whatever, I'll just say, okay, 25 minutes, even if I stare at the screen for those 25 minutes, that's fine. I'll just stare at the screen, do nothing, or I'll like write code. Doesn't matter, right? So that leads to like a lot less tension. Robert Duck already talked about. Yeah, and for Pomodoros, actually my company, I usually stick to like 10 a day, which is like a little more than 4 hours, and that's enough to get like great performance reviews. I usually like end up doing more just because I feel a little bit more. If it's a product I'm really interested in, then I'll end up doing more. If not, then I'll do 4 hours, and usually that's like 4 focus hours is usually enough. Motivation. Okay, so this can be the hardest part. So one thing that helps is getting good at interviewing, which comes down to like getting practice and doing these 3 companies. Read positive and useful posts. For CS career questions, all of you guys are from, there are some there are a lot of downer posts on there nowadays. But there are some really good positive posts there too, like the ones that are about like people succeeding and stuff. You should read those, that they're motivational. I made this CS career advancement one, which I kind of made it restricted to keep it a little more signal versus noise ratio, a little bit better. I'm only going to post like good advice on there, and a lot of posts that are like good advice or positive stuff. I have a Discord channel too, which you guys can just talk about, rant on, whatever. Hopefully that helps. And then the thing that helps is quantifying your results. So like if you're applying, like even if it takes 100 applications to get one interview, at least you know what that is. So like you could say, okay, so if I do those 100 applications, well, first thing I should do is try to get that down to, let's say, 50 applications for an interview. Kind of do that, like sort of work on that. And then once you hit that level, then it's like a good motivational boost. And then you can say, okay, 50 applications, one interview, let's work on my interview skills. Like, just keep going from there and just keep working on bottlenecks. What's the biggest thing holding you back? Community, everyone here, me and Tom, we're going to talk about that. Be real with their schedule. Don't bite off more than you can chew. That can also lead to motivational, kind of depression, as if you're like, hey, I want to be, I want to get a senior engineering position in like within 6 months, and you're like a junior engineer right now. That might not be possible. Figure out where you're at right now, and figure out where you want to be. Like, what's actually reasonable. And this is something you can you can talk to me about this. Like I can tell you a little more what's reasonable based on where you're at. And be reasonable also with your time, right? Like if you have a full-time job, and you have other duties, other things you're doing with your life, um, like actually be reasonable with how much extra time per day you can put in. Obviously, the more you put in, the quicker you'll get what you want, but be reasonable with that and realize that you're not a robot. Make sure you're doing things that are also kind of fun, like, hanging out with friends or watching Netflix, whatever you want to do that's like just helps you unwind a little steam. You need that too. Okay, so live resume workshop. We're kind of running out of time, so let's really quick. We got a volunteer here, so I'll pull it up. So while I'm pulling it up, does anyone have any questions? Or anything I've covered so far?
This has been great. I just want to make sure we don't take away time from the resume review.
Okay. Actually, I'll send you this later. The resource that I'll use for this. Okay, so this is the one. Thank you to Bob for letting me go over his resume for this. This is actually a good one. I like this because he already implemented some of my suggestions in terms of quantifying, right? Like this saving 20 hours per month, save company costs, blah, blah, that's good. One thing I like about this, actually, in a way I don't like it, like this about me, is kind of what I was talking about in terms of you are basically telling me what you are. You're a self-motivated learner with the passion for scalable architecture, blah, blah, blah. But you're not showing me. But it's good because these are all really good things to have, right? A self-motivated learner. So this is the first one. So how would you demonstrate that you're a self-motivated learner? I mentioned this in one of my earlier slides. How do you demonstrate that you're a self-motivated learner? What is something you can say in your resume, something you did? So you're a self-motivated learner and you learn quickly.
So because it's my resume, I could, like, an example I could have is we were working on this like new client side app. I'm mainly like a backend guy. Had to implement a feature. I had to learn GraphQL. And although I didn't like, I got a workable feature done in like 2 days, which, yeah, I had like no GraphQL experience before this.
Okay, good. So that's it would be better if there's a bigger project to use. Is there anything bigger that you did with GraphQL? Like, because 2 days almost sounds, 2 days sounds like it's a very small project.
Right.
But that is the right idea. Like here's one from my resume. So I taught myself Elixir, GraphQL, and Kafka in 2 months, collaborated with 3 teams for the development of a particular option for our sellers, saving the company about $500K per year. This was a massive project I worked on fairly recently, and a big win for the company. But you see how like that's like 2 months is like a little bit more reasonable. I'm just saying this is kind of someone who read the resume. Like 2 days just makes it sound like a smaller project. You might just say like taught myself GraphQL to do XYZ. What was it again? You taught your what did you actually do?
It was like a client side like integration. It was an integration with like an external app.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was through the client. Yeah.
Okay, so taught myself GraphQL to actually, yeah, you could do that. I'll take that back because you're more at the junior level. So I think that would make sense. Taught myself GraphQL in 2 days and to or I forget what it was to how would I say it? To build a client-side integration for a third-party API. Yeah. Trying to think about. Is there any bigger project that you worked on that took a little bit longer? Even if it's something that you weren't the only person working on it, but something bigger, like a multi-month project. Anything like that?
I've already mentioned like my messaging queue. That was like that pretty much took like 4 or 5 months. I just didn't bring it up because I already mentioned it, but it was
Oh,
like a
the
lot of
first one.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, let's read this. Okay, first of all, make this lowercase backend.
right, okay,
Let backend develop. Uh, okay, I want to make this more concise. Actually, you know what? No, this is fine. This is fine. This takes reading it twice to really understand what we did. Let's see. I think if you had more experience, then you want to kind of make it a little more concise. Even doing things like small things like being, so developing, doing dev, um, async, things like that. That's what I've had to do just because I have so many bullet points on it. But yeah, this is fine. So Aiden, I don't like Aiden. Use technical that. Okay, this. Can you talk a little more about this? Following a service architecture pattern. What do you mean by that?
yeah.
Like what pattern?
So basically, for a long time, like I'm sure, like so there's the MVC architectural pattern. When I originally started at this company, we had most of our business logic that existed at like the controller level, and it was like just terrible, like a lot of spaghetti code. So we ended up like, although we don't have microservices, we have like an MVC architecture, but the controllers call a service, and then the service calls like the abstracted like data layer, and that data layer would like interact with Mongo or SQL or whatever our store is. Um, yeah, so it's just like a lot of refactoring from controllers to independent services, whether it's like a Facebook service or like a um another example. Like Facebook's one of our big clients, so we have like a lot of different types of Facebook services.
So you have microservices now to interact with the other third-party APIs.
Um, they're not like full out microservices because they're not like deployed independently, but it's like a monolith with like
I guess I've seen that pattern before, like cleaning up the pattern in the MVC so the controller calls out to a different module so that it cleans up the code. I think maybe
exactly.
the value proposition you're trying to describe.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We just call them services, but like they're not like a microservice. They're just called that like internally.
I'm just trying to think about how to word that. First of all, I don't like aided in. That makes you sound like you like fetch coffee or something. Like say collaborated.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Collaborated in. Uh, Let's take me a second. And I don't like refactoring either because that's usually. I mean, what you did, I don't consider that as like refactoring. It seems like less than what you did. If that makes sense. Like you
I've,
implemented a new service-based architecture, and don't say pattern. Just say service-based architecture.
Right.
Am I?
I feel
Does
like
that make less?
the aided and refactoring the existed code base too. You could just slice that off because that's like almost obvious if you're writing code. Like if you're
Yeah,
reducing technical debt, you could just do reduce technical debt and then that
yeah,
afterward.
yeah. Perfect. I mean, if you feel strongly that you want to stay collaborative because whatever, but you can honestly for most of my things like I just even if I collaborate, if I had a large, if I wasn't even if I wasn't the only person who worked on it, if I had a very large like I did a very large part of it, I don't say, you know, collaborative or something, or like uh, something. I used to say things like that, but I usually just say it as if it was just me, and then, you know, if you talk about it, I'll say like, yeah, like I collaborated, but it just if I did a lot of the work, then you know, I'll just say, I would just say reduce. But if you want to say um, helped reduce or whatever, or collaborated, that part's up to you. But yeah, you're right. Thanks, Young. Take this and try it. That's why it was just sounding weird to me. Reduced technical debt, increased performance by let's say by implementing a new service-based architecture. How does that sound? These are just my, like, off the top of my head. Actually try putting these in and just like look at see how it looks. And if it makes sense based on what you did. Does that make sense? Like service-based architecture instead of service architecture pattern? It just, I don't know why that just service architecture pattern just seems a little redundant. Service-based architecture.
No, I think you have a point.
And if you mention service too, like other people are going to stumble over that. They're going to think you're talking about a service-oriented architecture or microservices, and I don't think you want to get into that discussion.
Well, it is. Well, actually, it is service-oriented architecture, right?
Yeah, it is
Is it not
service oriented. It's just not a microservice.
Yeah. Okay, so it's maybe in service-oriented might be better. Service-based, service-oriented. I think that sounds better because people like service architecture pattern kind of. You know what it is? Because I haven't seen it like written like that. I see service-based architecture. I've never seen service architecture pattern. I mean, it's the same thing, but it just comes off weird. It doesn't like. Again, it's a 10-second rule. Like it doesn't like immediately. It's not immediately clear what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so reduce technical debt. How do you like reduce technical debt? To be honest, how about I just implemented a new service-based architecture, which increase performance, reduce downtime, and save the company 24,000. 24,000. What does this mean? 24,000 to 12,000 in the span of 3 months.
Yeah, I could have worded that better, but just like a savings of $12,000 in 3 months.
So why are you saying 24,000?
Because the original budget was 24,000, and then it went down to 12,000.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, I just say 12,000 saved. Yeah. Okay, does that make sense? So
Mhm.
just say like, because you want to say like if you're the reducing technical debt, like this part 8 in refactoring, all refactoring is not impressive. Reducing technical debt is not at all impressive. But implementing a new service-based architecture that increased performance, reduced downtime, and saved the company 12,000. Or if you want to, or you can just say save the company 4,000 a month. Is it like 4,000 a month? So could you do annually like 48,000? Save the company 48,000 per year, or is that wrong?
I don't know. I don't think that's completely right because we have like a cost breakdown Excel sheet, and yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that part's not a big a deal. But, okay, so moving on from that, so wrote client-side architecture in React.js that allow clients to specify their ads with demographics and specific users, allowing for ads to be delivered to. Okay. Yeah, again, this is kind of something that sounds more impressive on the second read. So you basically, I have some resume point like this. Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you created a platform for clients to go on there and they can specify their ads and demographics to specific users and just like target their audiences better. So you made the clients happy, you made the business happy, you made the business more money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one thing I have here, actually, it's somewhat similar, is like I architect a platform for users to create and manage coupon redemption program using Ruby on Rails, Postgres, and saving users over 20% of the cash out liability while becoming a number one selling point for the sales team. So you have something actually similar, but it doesn't sound as good. What you should say is like, you could say architect or whatever. You developed a platform for clients to in React.js that allowed clients to specify. Yeah, don't write. That's it. Wrote client-side software. That's not good. Don't write that. Say developed a platform in React.js that allow clients to specify their ads by demographics and specific users. Allow for ads to be towards more meaningful audiences. And then, I mean, this comes down to, do you know any specifics of like how it helped the company? Like, was it a big complaint that clients had or anything like that?
Not at the moment. I'm sure I could like definitely find that out like when I go into work tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah,
I should definitely know
I mean, that part isn't as big a deal for this, but this is real client-side software. That's a terrible way to put it. You developed a platform, or you architected a platform that allow clients to specify their ads. Yeah. Do you see why that's better?
Yeah.
Okay. Refactored admin-facing UI. For internal account manager dashboard. Allow for admins to be automatically assigned to key Facebook ads. Dashboard for automatically assigned to key Facebook. Okay, first of all, you can take these last two words out. It's kind of implied. I don't know if you need to capitalize admin. That's not as big a deal, but it just seems a little weird. Then again, I don't like refactored. Yeah, refactored always sounds to me like it's not as big a deal. Like refactoring is just something you do to reduce some code or whatever. Like it can be great, but it can be not great too. So come with a better word for that. Let's see. Admin facing UI. You can take out admin. You can say admin UI dashboard. Or no, not take out facing UI. Refactored admin dashboard for internal account manager. Wait. Admin facing UI dashboard. Internal account. Oh man, it's kind of confusing. So can you explain this? You refactored the admin-facing UI dashboard for the internal account manager dashboard. So the admin part of the account manager dashboard.
I think I threw an extra dashboard in there. I think I probably should remove the second dashboard, but it was like we have internal admins that can communicate with clients, and they do a lot of their like automation work through there. And so like a lot of that was like, yeah, I guess refactor is not the right word, but I guess like I added a couple features and like just cleaned it up a bit, not necessarily stylistically, but like JavaScript wise.
Okay. I just want to cut out this first part. Like what it comes down to, here's a big part of it, right? What it comes down to is what did you do, right? I have to wait until I came down. No, I'm like telling you for this sentence, I have to wait until I read all these to finally see what you did, which is allow for admins to be automatically assigned to key Facebook assets. And you see, like this is all this. I just need to be it needs to be more, like immediate. What did you do? What value did you bring? So, added. How would I say this? Let's see. Added feature for admins to be automatically assigned to key Facebook assets. Added feature for admins to be automatically assigned to key Facebook assets. With decreasing load times admins faced. And then also add in the programming like using React.js. Could you even just do that? I don't know, play around with that a little bit. Like, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it just seems like so many words for it to get to what you're doing. What is the value you're bringing?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because all this stuff, I really don't care. This tells me nothing. And then this tells me something. And this last one, I was looking at this, I wasn't sure what to say. Like, because you have less bullet points, you might leave it up there. It just, I mean, this is kind of I don't know. It's like a cook saying that they can, also buy ingredients. I don't know if that makes sense. It's just like, this is something that's implied as any software engineer to be able to throw unit tests. It's not, it's a good thing. Like, obviously there are some that are not good, they don't know how to write unit tests, but it's almost like worthless to point this out unless it's something to do with like, maybe if you instead did it like this, if you said increased code coverage from 20% to 90% within a month, and collaborated with teams to ensure that we had a good unit testing process in place, or something like that. This is such a, it's very blah. Like this, every software engineer should be able to do this. Okay, and by the way, hopefully I'm not coming across as mean about this. I'm just telling you the reality of the situation.
I would definitely prefer if you tore it apart.
Okay, great. Okay, and then the rest of it is really just, the one thing I was going to point out is the web development bootcamp. This is entirely up to you. But there are some companies that don't like to hire from coding bootcamps. Entirely up to you. I don't think that really makes that much of a difference. Usually I always have left it off my resume and just said I'm like basically self-taught. Working on reduce bugs with them. Yeah, I mean, this one I don't really have to do too much for. You're a QA developer and you're a junior, so whatever. This, I like the front end, back end. I do maybe like add a link or something here. Usually people don't click on links, but at least if you have a link there, they know that you're not just making stuff up.
Yeah. No, like usually, the link is usually clickable. I think if you hit the...
Oh, okay, yeah. And then I mean, for projects, it's kind of what I usually do for that. Yeah, that's pretty much what I do. I mean, you could make it a little bit better if you can, just by maybe talking about what a bigger... No, you know what? Actually, no. This is fine. This is impressive. Let's go. Okay, I think that's like all I have right now. I know we're time too. So hopefully that helped.
Yeah. I had one question.
Yeah.
So in place of like where I have my like about me, should I just like get rid of that area completely?
I mean, about me has honestly never really done anything for me as an interviewer, and I don't think it really helps that much. But again, because you have like so few lines here, I think if you had more bullet points, I would say for sure take that out, and then like move skills to the top, move education to the bottom, and just have all of this right here. But honestly, I think it's neutral. Up to you. I think it's
Cool.
neutral. Yep. All right, cool. So yeah, we're way past time, but does anyone else have any other questions?
No, I think good to pick it up next week.
Cool.
Maybe follow
right.
up in the Discord.
Yeah, we'll do. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
All
that
good,
was
man.
really good. Thank you.
That was awesome.
Bye now.